You're talking about it, I'll be talking about it. Dennis Prager here. Join me this morning at 11, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Our colleague Dennis Prager is featured in a new film, Adam Carolla, documentary that's coming out next year, No Safe Spaces. They've got a trailer out on Facebook. YouTube, excuse me.
The university. Undoubtedly the one place where the free exchange of ideas meets with intellectual vigor and civility.
You were disgusting. Slap your racist mama!
The university is ours. Expect resistance to anyone who opposes us.
There will be resistance, and it will not be peaceful.
Free speech is free on campuses unless you're hearing ideas you don't like.
And you get the gist of it per our regular Campus Beat segment on this show. You should have a good understanding of the anti-intellectualism, intolerance, and totalitarian re-education that's going on in most college campuses in the country. Why we're pleased to be joined by Greg Lukianoff, who is the CEO of FIRE, Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. TheFire.org is their website. He's a free speech lawyer. He's also the co-author of the new book, The Coddling of the American Mind, obviously a takeoff on Alan Bloom's magnum opus, The Closing of the American Mind. The Coddling of the American Mind is the name of the book, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. And we're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid Greg Lukianoff. Greg, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, since I referenced Bloom, which I think you're referencing in that title, why don't you tell us what's happened on college campuses from Alan Bloom to present?
Well, I only started working on free speech issues on campus since I graduated from law school around 2000. And from about 2000 to 2013, the best constituency on campus, believe it or not, were for freedom of speech was actually the students themselves. And if you were going to get in trouble on campus, chances were it was actually going to be an administrator who decided to shut you down. But something really changed dramatically in 2013, 2014. That's when you first start hearing about, microaggression policies, trigger warning policies, safe spaces. It all seemingly happened overnight. And the coddling of the American mind is primarily trying to figure out what on earth happened.
Well, I mean, in addition to the sort of the abridgment of free speech and the big lie that this is the campus is a free marketplace of ideas. There's also the anti-intellectualism as it pertains to the scholarship coming out of universities, and we have this notable example that popped up last week where a respected Brown University academic is being shut down by her own school for doing research on the topic of transgenderism and the social component of transgenderism, why so many young girls have an epiphany that they're transgender. Is there a social anxiety, a social influence component? And she's not being backed up by Brown University. She's had a former dean of Harvard Medical School rally to her defense about the integrity of her research and that it calls for more research. You have anti-intellectualism at the academic level, so of course that's going to redound to anti-intellectualism at the student level.
Yeah, actually, two of the most harrowing chapters in the whole book are about student, outrage mobs trying to shut down professors, particularly talking about the case of Brett Weinstein at Evergreen State University. But then, much like the case you're talking about, we talk about this really horrifying case involving a professor named Rebecca Tuvell. And she wrote an academic article making the argument saying that, if we can accept that people can decide their gender, why shouldn't Rachel Dolezal also, someone who decided, a white woman who decided to live her life as a black woman, why isn't that equally legitimate? And it was a thoughtful academic paper. And in the book, and we try to be pretty calm about these issues in the book, but in the book we liken it to a genuine witch hunt, given that she was having people sign public denunciations, Professor Duvel was, of her, but then, writing her behind the scenes saying, yeah, I'm really sorry what they're doing to you.
Wow.
And so is it salvageable? I mean, Amy Wax, the University of Pennsylvania law professor who's had her own experience, which I'm sure you're familiar with, she basically says,
it's in the book.
She says the Ivy League is gone. The Ivy League is gone.
Yeah.
It'd be better to just essentially decommission Ivy League schools and start over.
Yeah, I hear this fatalism, and the thing for me is that we haven't even really begun to fight these trends, because right now we're really seeing a lot of public awareness about it. And the latest phase of it, where the students themselves are the ones demanding this censorship, we really haven't seen that since, say, like the early 90s. And we haven't done even basic things like get rid of campus speech codes, or even have, a session at the beginning of when people enter for orientation explaining what academic freedom is, what freedom of inquiry means. So, we've barely even begun to fight, and I think people are throwing in the towel too quick.
Do you think there's going to come a time when there's not even going to be grades distributed, just pass or fail?
Well, at some schools there's not, and definitely when you look at grade inflation, that's arguable that at some schools that there really are still grades, given the most common grade you get at Harvard is an A.
That's right. So you might as well not have grades. Everybody wins. Here's the where does this go, I guess, is the question. And so there do seem to be some encouraging signs to address the fatalism that I started here in this conversation. Heterodox academy, academics of the left and right politically that are charting a different course, doing their own course offerings, obviously other online outlets like Khan Academy that provide coursework online. There was a famed Harvard business professor, Clayton Christensen, Mr. Disruptive Innovation, said the other week that he predicts that in the next 10 years, half the colleges in this country will be bankrupt because the price point doesn't make any sense for the return on investment. Do you see sort of a disruptive innovation like Heterodox Academy, Khan Academy, coming online to upend the model of higher education in this country in the near term?
I mean, I think about this all the time, and I really want this to happen. At the same time, if you look at the ranking for top schools in the country and go back 100 years, it's amazing that, Princeton and Harvard, they're all still at the top of the list. So the top schools aren't going away anytime soon. But these big, I think there was someone who was calling them bad bet schools, essentially $60,000 a year to go to a mid-tier school, just doesn't make any sense.
Well, where do you think this is going to go from here? I mean, I don't see it getting any more liberal and progressive. But then again, nothing surprises me anymore.
Yeah, well, things are going to keep on going in one direction until they can't.
Stein's law. Yeah, right.
Exactly. So I'm hopeful in some ways. I see greater public awareness of this issue. I mean, I felt like we were toiling in obscurity from 2001 to 2015, talking about how bad things were on campus already. But there's a lot more awareness of it. The problem is, of course, though, that some of these problems we're seeing, they pose a long-term threat to the viability of our democracy. If you really do have universities that could be kind of making us more willing to hear the other side, and they should be making us more open-minded, actually making us more kind of like political and tribal, it can take a bad situation and make it a lot worse before it gets better.
Well, and the other thing is, and I think you're getting to this in your book as well, setting up a generation for failure. That young people are less resilient. Sarah Lipson at Boston University had suggested that in a recent interview with the Boston Globe. You have another story out today that's really disturbing, and perhaps it goes to this issue as well. 20% of college students have weighed suicide, according to a study from Brigham and Women's Hospital. So the resiliency of students that you're trying to protect from themselves or from opinions they disagree with.
Yeah. Well, this is the scariest finding in the whole book, and definitely in researching it. Because we wrote an article called "Coddling the American Mind" back in 2015, basically arguing that we're teaching this generation that the mental habits of anxious and depressed people. So we shouldn't be surprised if they're anxious and depressed. But the numbers, when they finally came out, were so much worse than we ever imagined. We are talking about of suicide for young women just between 2007 and now. The mental health situation on campuses is actually terrible. That's not just people making it up. But our argument in the book is that this is exactly what we should expect when we're teaching, a generation of students that they should overgeneralize, they should catastrophize, they should engage in all this bad thinking.
It seems to me one of the things that we could do as conservatives, free thinkers, is what U.S. News and World Report does. You mentioned the rankings of best schools and all that. Is put out more of our own rankings on the schools you should consider if you truly do believe a college campus should be a free marketplace of ideas, and the questions you should be asking as you consider and your son or daughter considers what school they want to attend, as we sit here during sort of the application process right now for seniors.
Yeah, Heterodox Academy is trying to do exactly that, and I think that more public awareness of schools, if you actually want to have productive disagreement at a school, which schools you should go to and which schools you shouldn't. But you can also look up some of the incidents at thefire.org, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, where I'm president. We have some really horrifying tales of schools that don't respect viewpoint diversity, and some encouraging ones of schools that do.
Yeah, I think we've been doing this Campus Beat segment on this show for a few years now.
Yeah, we even have a theme song.
That's right, and I think we're down.
What's the theme song?
Oh, you want to hear it?
You want to hear it? Here.
Yeah, here it goes.
Yeah, I do.
Go, Justin, go. Our technical producer.
They got the beat, the campus beat, the campus beat.
What do you think about that?
That's awesome.
Yeah, the campus beat.
All right, so that'll be an earworm that you'll have to contend with the rest of the day now. But I think we're down to 6 acceptable colleges or universities you can send your kids. Maybe you have a list that we can add colleges to, but we're down to a pretty small number.
University of Chicago has been doing a good job of trying to fight back some of these trends, and that's one of them. And Princeton actually hasn't been that bad either. But definitely, you mentioned we've seen a lot of problems at Brown. Actually, DePaul University, we have no apologies about saying is one of the worst in the country for a lot of the issues we talk about here.
Yeah, there you go. It's one of those Catholic universities that hates Catholicism. It's very curious. He is Greg Lukianoff. He's the CEO of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. Thefire.org is the website. He's also a lawyer and author of the book, The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.